A Star Wars tattoo I saw recently. It looks awesome.
Thanks, dude. The
Sweet.
the funny thing about that tattoo is that the people came in. They were really nice. They booked out like 2 months ahead, and one of them had asked. I think it was the girlfriend that set it up, or the wife, and she was like, "We're not going to be able to make it on the 4th, which is May the 4th. Be with you and stuff. But can we do it on Revenge of the Sith?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Like they were deliberately they wanted those dates, and so when they came in, they were the happiest, coolest couple, and
That's
I
awesome.
had to do like above and beyond for them.
Yeah.
But anyways, as we get back into it, hello and welcome to this week's edition of the World of Pencils podcast. I'm your 1973 rollerball champion, X, and I am here with the amazing ever artist, man, myth, and instructor as well. To anyone that's just willing to ask, David Cheifetz, how's it going, brother?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Thanks for being here, Brian. This is our second time talking on a podcast, but I mean we talk pretty frequently through email, which I kind of consider to be a little bit more rare these days, where you just email somebody rather than text them. It's like a special little letter.
Yeah, it's old fashioned now.
So you just came back from Denver.
Yep. Yep. Back from the show.
Nice. Could you let people know what show it was?
Yeah, my solo show at Gallery 1261, called Uncanny Worlds. And yeah, lots of new paintings and been working on it for about a year. So yeah, it was really great to see everything, hanging up on the walls. Always so different than in the studio.
Was it a group show or was it a a solo show?
Yeah, it's just a solo,
Oh, nice. Was this the one you were telling me about a while back?
probably. Yeah, yeah,
That's dope,
yeah.
man.
That's the only one. So yeah.
Nice. So, if you don't mind me saying, over the conversations we've had, which for anyone that doesn't know David, he was previously on a podcast that I host myself, and was just I mean I am not was, but a huge fan of his work, and just the amount of luminance and life he brings to him with texture was awesome. Doing research on the guy, I went to another podcast known as Gently Does It with John Dalton. And I was listening to it and I was just like, oh man, like he's got some really interesting things and all these other stuff. And listening to other artists and like, all right, I'm gonna ask him real good questions because he's a fine artist in my eyes. And coming to actually listen to David speak, I was like, wow, I have a lot in common with his thought process as far as like the famous one I've always reiterated is that you were talking about how you really don't have the ability to look at things and be like, oh my God, it's art. And you're looking at like, a pile of dog shit and you're like, look at the browns, the way they meet with the sepia. And you were like, I sometimes I see a movie or I watch something and it makes me want to paint or this and that. And ever since then, and sitting down and talking with him, we've emailed, and actually, he's the one that emails me almost after every show, and was like, "Dude, this was cool," or "Please ask more of this." And
Yeah,
uh,
you've been killing it. It's
oh,
awesome. I love listening. It's the best thing when I'm painting.
well, thanks,
It's
dude.
awesome.
It's definitely not me though. It's the guests that make it. I just happen to be the dopey host that does it. But the good thing about it is the activeness of artists in the art scene, which is something that you're predominantly really all about. I mean, behind all the actual painting, you genuinely care about the art. You genuinely care about things that teach you more about art, and it shows with your work. Now, going back to the whole idea of like the solo show, you were saying that your artwork, like having to do a solo show, is extremely stressful. And over the few artists that I've talked to that are doing solo shows at the moment or prepping for them, they're saying it's overwhelming. Is there any specific reason why that it's overwhelming?
For me at least, well, maybe two things. First, just financially, it's such a weird thing. Like, working for, say, a year, uh, for the possibility of selling at the end is like a huge gamble. So in order to deal with that, at least for me, it's important to just have a lot of different sources, random sources of reliable income, so that I can manage during that time. But yeah, it's for both the gallery and the artist, it's really just a weird thing. It's just a weird gamble. Like you're literally gambling on your livelihood. So um, that's one thing. And the other weird thing is that after I'm finished painting something, I can't wait to get it out the door. Like I don't like stacking things up in the studio. It just gives me a feeling like
You're holding on to things.
yeah, I don't like that. Like an antsy feeling, like a burdened by past paintings. So I like to just get it out as soon as possible. So to have things stack up for like 9 months or whatever, that yeah drives me drives me nuts.
It's funny because you had mentioned that last time, and I think you also mentioned it in an email when we were talking about it, and
Yeah,
it's what pushed me to actually take my paintings, every single one that I've done, and sell them. And I've never sold
I,
anything, but like
it's
the
great.
money I donated. I'm one of those people when you've heard it. I forgot what was the podcast. You would probably know the one we were talking about. Oh, Blake, that was the one. Having the necessity to paint for a living versus painting just when you can and enjoying it. Um,
Right.
and
Yep.
to me, I am one of those people where it's like anytime I paint something, I rarely sell them, or if I do sell them, I try to donate the money because I already have an income that I feel like,
Right.
artistically I can pull from. So this is something more that I want to learn for myself. And I remember thinking like, all right, David's right. Like I need to let go, make room, and grow. And then the next, I don't know, 2 3 days later, some guy came in. He's like, yeah, this is the guy who does all the comic book stuff really well. I drove up here about an hour from Greenfield, which is a town south from us. So I drove up
Yeah.
here with my son to show him all your stuff, but I had just sold it, and I was like, "Oh, I got pictures on Instagram."
Yeah. That's awesome, man. That's great. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's important. I really do. Like, you're training yourself to be not precious at all with your work, and to actually know that no matter what, you can make a better painting next time, so that there's no hesitation for letting things go. I think that's really important. Yeah, and what you're saying, we were talking about earlier. I actually, yeah, I, I know for some artists it's really hard to feel like you have to do it to make money, but for me, that's I think that's an important motivation, and for me, it's always been that way. That to also need to do it for myself, just for like my own fulfillment, but to actually need to do it to survive. Um, that's that extra push that can push you beyond like any artistic roadblocks or um, lack of inspiration or whatever. When you just have to do it no matter what. Um, so I like that type of pressure.
now with your artwork in specific, you do a lot of detail work. You do a lot of life studies. I remember somebody asking this on the other podcast that we never got to ask. Like, what did your necessity of having to paint still life come from the necessity of having to pay bills and feed your family, or did it come predominantly because you're sitting at the point and you find that painters when they're first learning, when they're students, they're like, oh my god, all my paints are going to dry up, if you don't know how oils like relatively work, compared to how long you can leave them out, or just the fact was like, you know what, I need to get this done because I'm only going to have X amount of time to do it in my day. And you've just kind of always kept up that work ethic.
Well, back to the first part you just said about still life, like that need to sell. Um, the way it manifested itself was not that I've ever felt constrained, like I needed to paint a certain subject. it just made me feel like I had to get better. No matter what, I had to get better, and it didn't matter what I painted. It's how I painted it. It just had to be as good as possible, and so I never felt constrained in that way. Um, but yeah, the second part about paint, um, yeah, that's a whole nother thing. I over time, I just realized that you just have to be comfortable with painting uh, wet or dry. Um, it doesn't matter. That's what you're talking about, right?
Well, the person, I think that they were more just wondering. Yes, that's a good point, but I think they were wondering, or the way I interpreted the question was like, how would you, what made you develop having to paint at the speed and the time
Oh, I
frame
see.
that you do? Because
Right.
was it a necessity? Because like when you first start oils, you're worried like if you never use oils and you're fresh to it, I mean,
Hmm.
no pun intended. And but you're used to acrylics, you're used to acrylics, and you're thinking, oh my god, I got 5 minutes before these things harden up, or
Right.
I got
Right. Right.
20 minutes or an hour. So working with that, you see a lot of painters who develop a quicker technique of application because it's a necessity versus some people with oil. They learn to. It's almost like I think of it as like being a kid versus being an adult. You try to paint super fast because as a child you're always trying to just rush and just get it done rather than doing it right. And the older you get, almost like oils, you become more patient, you become a little bit more understanding because you've been there, you've done that, and you know how to take it slow, and take it at its time. So that question kind of came to me as like, was it something that you just adapted to and kept, or is it something you managed over time? Because he had seemed to thought that, I guess, you painted really really quick, and maybe your paints were a little bit harder. That's why you started using a palette knife. You know what I mean? So just the random curiosities of people.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I paint direct, so I don't use layers, and that's how I was taught. Was mostly taught direct painting. So um, whereas more like uh, well, some painters they do a layer technique where they put down a layer, wait for it to dry, put down another layer, wait for it to dry. So they're constrained by wait times and all that. So maybe they need to stagger paintings to have always something to work on, but you need to let it dry before you go on top. The way I was taught is that you just try to achieve the end effect from the very beginning. So you lay on, paint directly. So I was never my um, the speed thing was just well, that the direct painting allows for speed and efficiency, um, but also I just wanted to get things done. I just wanted to make a lot of paintings because, again, as I was taught, um, more starts are better. Like if you can start that initial part where you're composing, you're laying in, um, you're doing the layout and everything. The more times you have to do that beginning part, which is the hardest, the better you'll be at it. So I was always motivated to do that quickly. So no, I was just always using just normal oil paint. Recently, I've been using alkyds as well, which are faster, but just normal oil paint. Um, and as long as you're committed to always be direct, um, like you're always adding on new paint. You're actually laying new paint on top of old paint. You're not digging down into the layers of paint beneath. It won't matter if it's wet or dry. You won't get messy with the wet into wet technique because you're actually just laying paint on top
Mm,
with a nice juicy brush stroke, not pressing into the panel
mm.
or canvas, but actually just laying it on top. Um, so at this point, it really doesn't matter whether the paint is wet or dry to me. Um, and with the knife stuff, that was just a way to get as thick thick of paint as possible as soon as possible. That's it.
Well,
Yeah.
the misconception of you doing art and your artwork, like you said, from seminars, from classes, and so forth, that you've taught, is that people are surprised on how little paint you actually use. they assume that, all right, if I buy a 20-ounce tube, I may be able to get like a third of the painting done versus what you actually do.
Yeah, it's a balance between um, thickness and control. So I paint thickly with a brush, as thick as I can manage. That's why I use a bristle brush, a nice stiff bristle brush. Um, the knife is even thicker, but still it's controlled. So when you actually look at the amount of paint on the knife, it's still more than on the brush, but it's not like you're just slathering on just gigantic amounts of paint. You're still um, being precise with precision knife strokes. So yeah, during workshops, people are often like, "Oh, that's it." But the key thing is that yes, that's it, but that's for one knife stroke. I'm not going, I'm not like spreading it all over the place. That's a precision stroke, and then you have to go down and get more paint and keep on applying paint.
Well, I would guess that a lot of people assume it's almost like Bob Ross. They see him classically grabbing a palette knife, and he's like, "You see this? We're gonna have happy little mountains," and you hear it against the canvas. So I would assume that some of your students or people that try to learn your style of painting, they see that paint that you're doing and then they just tear into it because it's not. I mean, not like they're trying to break the canvas, but you know what I'm saying. But to people out there that may not know, like the idea of like trying to scrape off frosting from a cake. You know what I mean? You're almost trying to like remove it with enough pressure, and that's not really the case that you go for. Correct?
Correct. Yep. Just like as when I paint with a brush, my goal is to gently lay paint on top of the existing paint. So I'm always making progress, always making the painting thicker. Um, yeah, what was I going to say? I was gonna say something else. Oh, well, actually, in workshops, so if there's maybe some students when they start using the knife, they'll use too little paint, and then some students will use too much. I actually like to see it when they use a little bit too much, because in order to learn, when if you can learn to manage with precision too much paint, that's just going to make your control that much better. Whereas if you're just still scraping it around with tiny little bits of paint, that's that's really going to hurt the painting. Um, make it thin and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, coming from a watercolor point of view and gouache, like there's very few people I see in both of those mediums that actually use a tremendous amount of paint. Like the rule of thumb I've
Right.
always learned from other gouache or watercolor artists, predominantly in comic books or in cover art, they'll they unscrew their cap and they put a dollop in their cap, and the cap they just tap it down onto the on the panel or whatever they're using as a mixing board, and that's it. That's enough and sufficient to even do an 8x10 because you're using a water to dissolve the pigment itself. With oil, I had the same idea of like, all right, just a dollop of oil, and I was trying to spread it so thin because you see so many different types of oil painters as well as acrylic and so forth. But the idea that cutting it with mineral spirits, paint thinners, cutting it with all these other little things is going to push the paint further, like other mediums. Rather, when they want the opacity and saturation, they're actually pulling away from that. And you're right, having a little bit too much more paint on your palette gives you a little bit more time to play with, gives you a little bit more experimentation. You're not limiting yourself just to be like, oh shit, what do I do now?
Yeah. 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 Watercolor. I I never felt like I understood watercolor. So, and I still it feels wrong to me. I think because I'm used to oil. It's like the opposite. Like with oil, you can add medium to the oil to thin it down, but you're doing that to add translucency for the darks. And in the lights, you want opacity and thickness. Whereas in watercolor, it's not gouache, but watercolor, it's the opposite. It's like you add water, you want more translucency to let the paper come through in the lights, and your your thicker color or with less water in it is actually in your darkest spots. At least that's my understanding of watercolor. So
Yeah.
it's completely I can't do
Well, I mean,
it.
like, put it this way. So it's funny because translating oil makes no sense to me, even though I've seen you do it. I've seen Che Smith, Kate. I've seen all these people paint in front of me and been very, oh, I mean, I have yet to see him paint in front of me, but I've been very fortunate to see many of the processes of you guys. And even when I've seen videos of yourself, it makes no sense to me because in watercolor, I go in and I ink everything, all my blacks, like my straight blacks, and then I go and paint my value, even if it's just color and there's minimal grays, like a narrow scale value of grays. I go in and if there's a really deep blue that looks black, I will paint it as purple as I can without hitting black, and then you build the lights away from that. Other watercolor artists or gouache artists usually they'll go in with everything super light and then they'll push in the blacks in those
Right.
small corners. And so you have these two ways that work consecutively with each other, but you're able to push and pull freely. But all your lightest areas, unless you're airbrushing or using Prisma pencils, you got to get that lightest spot, the hottest spot, perfect on the first try.
Yeah.
And I like that. With oil, I'm like, I don't get it. Like I just put more paint and more paint in it. It looks like shit. And they're like, well, you're pressing too hard, so I press lighter. You're not pressing hard enough, so I press medium. Dude, you're not pressing hard enough. I press a little bit harder. You're pressing too hard. Fuck.
Well, the beauty I think of oil paint is that you can try as many times as you need to.
Yeah.
It's so forgiving that there's nothing that can't be undone. Um, Literally, you can fix any problem in an oil painting, whereas in other mediums that you use, that is you got to get it right first, which is harder, I think. I think oil is easier in that way. Yeah, I think it's the easiest, actually.
We have a question here from Richard Bergolf. Gloff. I'm like, I can't pronounce that last name, bro. I'm sorry. He wants to ask two questions. One, were you traditionally taught to, like going to school, or did you learn on your own? And two, he asked, did he say that he never did underpaintings?
Oh, asking me if I know. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I always love the chance to plug the Schuler School in Baltimore because it's a very, very small family-run, like a kind of classical atelier school. Um, and
I'm joking. I'm sorry.
pinkies out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. That's where I learned to paint, and uh, they have they teach kind of both. You can do full underpainting or more of a quick, direct, just kind of block in. But yeah, I guess in a way, I have done underpaintings, but just as in just umber uh, block in of darks. Yeah, I can't. I don't think I ever did a full. Well, maybe I
Underpaint.
did. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Several times I did a full like grisaille, which is just monochromatic, and then you can come back on in color.
Mm.
Monochromatic in umber, either burnt or raw umber. Um, but even that is, I don't like that method because it's too slow. Why bother establishing? Why bother establishing values with your in the grisaille method, only to paint over them again in full color? Um, that makes no sense to me. It seems really inefficient. So the way I do it is just a quick but precise umber block in a shape of shadow. Just two values, dark or light, and the light is just the tone of the panel. Um, and that places the composition, and then just start painting direct on top of that. No turning of form, no gradients in that at all, just two values. So go to the Schuler School.
You were, excuse me, real quick. Could you explain the Grisme method? I forgot how you pronounced it.
Grisai?
Grisaille
Yeah,
method. I've never actually heard that myself.
yeah. Basically, it's you basically paint the painting with full values. It's um, but it's just monochromatic. It's with umber, and then in the lights white. And so you're just um, it's basically you can leave it as is. They can be beautiful paintings. But then if you take it farther, um, you can glaze on top of that, which will allow you to keep some of the work you've done already in the values while starting to get color into the whites, into the lights. So I mean, it's pretty elegant. It's an elegant, beautiful technique, but I prefer direct. Yeah.
Nice. With that being said, the do you feel like that helps you out tremendously? Because going back to the relation between watercolor and oil, having I guess you could say the grisaille method, that's very much what inkers do. You know, having to understand just two values, the canvas value and then the black's value, and the idea being you have to see you're kind of working backwards through value. You're trying to work up to bring out the light and the focal point versus saying like, okay, bam, there's my highlight, bam, there's there, and then I'll just find 30. Like, you know, there are some painters out there that are like, I have 40 variants of gray that I use just to get this one transition. You're like, that's cool. Like, wow, I never knew green could be a gray. And they're like, oh yes, yes, very much so, you know. But the that makes a lot of sense, at least to myself, because
Yeah.
now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, all right, well, when I've seen you work on things, predominantly, even anyone that does still life or does fine art, they always have this gray tone. It's like a really nice matte gray that encompasses the background of what they're doing, and that neutral color helps really bring out all the other colors that are surrounding it, whether it be dark, light, warm, cool. And it's nice because understanding that helps me kind of see, okay, well, now maybe that's a better way to approach oil, because I would still have the process for myself of being like, oh man, I have to do all the darks, leave the rest, and then build away until I pretty much my highlight is where my highlight needs to be. Except I can actually, if I lose my highlight, I can just go right back over it.
Yeah.
But that's nice, man.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so for me at least. I think the reason that I've stuck with direct and that it makes the most sense to me is that, like you were saying, just laying down a highlight right away. So, um, for me, the success of a painting is just how much focus is in that painting, and so for me, that means you need to establish focus first. You need information before painting everything else. So, if you're creeping up on your lights, creeping up on your color, creeping up on your darks, like all very tentative, um, you're constraining yourself because you don't see you don't see what you're trying to do. But if you go direct, you can paint in the focus first, get your lightest light, richest color, darkest dark, all that really vital information, so that you can then design the rest of the painting around it to make that spot the focus. Um, like that's the fastest way, most efficient way to get to your end goal. So that's why direct works best for me. Yeah.
When people, I mean, do you use a wash at all on your canvases? Like you see a lot of artists that they take like a sepia tone or they take a raw umber and wash like mineral spirits, and then they just kind of run a rag across it. Do you do that, or you just go straight?
If it's like just a white panel,
Mm-hmm.
I do put a tone over it so it's not white. It's just confusing and distracting if you're working right like purely on white,
Mm-hmm.
because I like to get the um, at least an impression of what I'm going for right away. So if I have white panel and I put down my highlight, it's not going to look light at all, and then I'm going to have to fill in, all the white space. So I do think having a nice tone on there is very helpful.
Now, your opinion on the differences between brown tones or warm tones versus the natural cools or the neutrals like grays. Speaking to David Casson a few episodes ago, he was saying too, is like with his, he prefers to work in gray neutral tones or lighter blue tones as his base and then build on
Mhm.
top of those compared to other artists that work in the warm tones and go from there. I've seen you predominantly work in the warm tones because most of your stuff is a contrast between warm and neutral. Is what's your opinion on the differences of those, or maybe the preferences for people that are
Mhm.
curious?
Sure. Well, right now it just depends on what for each painting what my focus is going to be. So, like if I have a bunch of panels that are white, and I want to pre-tone them, um, I'll do a bunch warm, a bunch cool, maybe different weird colors, maybe blue or orange or whatever, so that um, they're just on hand. And then when I'm starting a painting, I'm going to decide what's the focus, and then I look at it. Is it predominantly warm or cool focus? What about which temperature is kind of that um, going to be that dramatic color that I want to really bring out? And then I will just choose the opposite tone. So if it's going to be like an orange, um, glowing orange or something like that, I'll choose like a very cool tone, like bluish or something. Um, yep. So it just depends on really what the focus is going to be, and I just like doing opposite because then right away, because I'm starting with my focus first, from my first brushstrokes, I get that start. It pops right away. I get an impression of what I'm going for.
Nice. So when you first started painting and getting into like when you were going to school and attending, who were some of the
Yeah.
influences you had as artists back then that kind of helped shape your interest then? And then who are some of those artists and influences now?
Oh yeah. Um, well, back then, the first artist whose work I made me realize I've talked about this before too, but I like to mention it because it's really important for me. Was David LaFell, um, because it wasn't just still life. He elevated it and made it. He makes it otherworldly, um, and with extreme focus. So things seem to glow, in the dark, and your eye is drawn just to one spot in the painting, and it's just powerful. Um, that's when I realized there was so much potential in still life, um, because still life is really by itself literal. A literal still life to me is very boring. It doesn't matter what meaning or narrative or sentimental value or whatever you have with the objects. If it's just literally painted, um, it's very boring, except maybe to the person who has those meanings attached to the objects. But if you can elevate that by creating focus and creating drama, like David LaFell does, um, then it can be exciting. So that was probably the biggest influence early on for me.
Nice. And what were some of the influences as of past maybe few years that have kind of elevated your interest or helped you as a painter?
hmm Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I there's just so many contemporary artists that are just badass, just so good. So Instagram is constantly, you know, challenging the way I think about things. But maybe a major one is Daniel Sprick because very like if you look at his still lives, very unlike David LaFell. So David LaFell's work was like really in your face sense of focus, whereas Sprick's still lifes it's more hierarchical and and subtle and but just masterful. Like I was just really drawn to his stuff. So um, yeah.
Nice. Those it's cool. Those I'm sorry. Those questions. I'm reading a few other ones as well online. Richard Bergloff. Glof. God damn it, I can't get your name right, Brad. Richard was the one who asked that, and with a follow up question as well. Have you ever thought of painting? Which I'm actually interested in this fantasy art, like Frazetta, which Frazetta is an iconic fucking painter. I mean, at least to me, I love his work. Him,
She's so good.
Hammer, Struzen, all these guys. But that's a really interesting question because you have these paintings that you've done of a woman with horns and wings as
Yeah.
of recent. Have you ever thought about doing? I mean, because you have a very contemporary as well as like a surrealistic understanding of how to bring things to life, you know. But that's a very interesting idea to imagine you doing a giant cover of something. Have you ever been interested in something like that? Or
Oh yeah. I mean that's well, okay. So
good
that's
question,
originally
Richard. Good question.
yeah, good question. That's originally what I was going for. Like the reason I went to the Schuler School was because I knew my figure drawing needed to improve because I wanted to do comic books
Hmm.
and illustrations, anything sequential art, all of it. So awesome. So that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I was doing is like, um, yeah, drawing superheroes, trying to make comics. I was trying to do it digitally too. Had a Intuos 3, I think, tablet, and yeah, was submitting stuff to publishers, and I was determined. And then when when I went to Schuler School and started painting, I realized that that's what I wanted to do. That the even if it was just still life, the paint was just so immediate and so tactile and so much freedom. Like there was no limits, and and uh, it wasn't tedious at all.
Hmm.
Um, like even with in illustration and comic book art and stuff, to me like doing backgrounds like buildings or whatever, that would be so tedious to me. And I think it's because like coming from architecture, I wanted to get away from any of that. I wanted to just have immediate, just be free. So yeah, I mean, I still love illustration and I'm a big fan. Um,
Let me ask this real quick. So you were saying like you started off on an Intuos 3, a Wacom product,
yeah.
and then went back into physical and learning the painting and the love for painting. What is your biggest like opinion or a thing that you keep in mind when it comes digital versus physical? Because speaking to digital artists, the idea for some of them is like I don't have the resources to keep buying paint over and over and over, or I can't paint. You know, I can't break out stuff in a messy area. I can work off a little tablet and I'm okay. Others like the idea of just infinite possibilities to do stuff with digital, especially that Control Z button of being able to take away. But
Oh man, I have opinions on this.
and versus physical, where you hear and see people in the physical media, a medium and world, you know, that are just like, oh well, there's no lifeblood into it. I like your point of view. I know we've spoken about this before because you and a fellow artist, Paul Shipper, are two people that I think I've spoken to this before on the other podcast, and I genuinely agree with the fact that it's an educated opinion, but at the same time is like it comes from a good reason, because Paul, for anyone that hasn't heard any episodes before, doesn't know who Paul is. If you've seen Rogue One, Star Wars, Doctor Strange, any Marvel or Lucasfilm slash Disney movie
Yeah.
in the past few years, those are his posters. You know, he's the modern day Drew
Yeah. So
Struzan,
awesome.
but he is a physical artist. He just prefers to
Yeah.
work in digital.
Yeah.
And seeing something that you do on your end, the illustration, the Rosetta inspiration. Not, we're labeling it that for right now. I'm not saying that that's where it's from, but just in general, like there are certain things that you cannot get. I think it's just an artist thing. Like if you're somebody who collects art, a poster's okay, you know. But if you're someone who does art, there's something you don't get from a physical painting, from feeling that stroke, from feeling that paint, from
Yep.
feeling that rush.
Yeah.
So, what is your opinion on those?
Oh yeah, I have lots of. Oh,
Please go
first
for it,
off,
man.
I just had a thought. Maybe Lafell is the Frazetta of still life, because that's why Frazetta is so good. Is that his the sense of focus is mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
It he just draws you to one area of the painting, and it's dramatic, and it's just spectacular. So that's why I like both probably. But yeah, I think with the uh, with the difference there, and I think it's probably changed a lot, like the technology, like with the new Cintiqs and all that. Um, but for me, it was the lack of feedback, like and since I was looking up at the monitor but drawing down here, it's like it's just
It's disconnected.
it's so disconnected, and like I want to feel like the texture, the amount of pressure, all this stuff really informs you about what you're doing. But I'm sure technology is way different now. I'm sure it's like with the new it's real super sensitive tablets and stuff. I'm sure it's better, but yeah, that's it for me. Um, that the feedback is one thing, and then um, the other thing is what you're saying about Control Z. Um, for me, that was a dangerous thing because
Yes.
it encouraged laziness. And what I mean by that is that um, you don't have to be as, if you rely on the Control Z, you don't have to be as careful, you don't have to be as precise and methodical and intentional with each brushstroke or line or whatever, because you always know, no matter what, Control Z, go back, try it again, Control Z. And yeah, when I starting to paint, and at the time I was using the digital stuff a lot, and I'd get this twitch. I would be like, oh, I just want to Control Z that. It'd be so easy. But yeah, I'm sure people can get around this issue, but for me, it was not good. It made me sloppy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and and your other comment about digital being in terms of space and equipment and stuff being just a convenience, and I can see that how some artists would like that because it's no fumes, you can have it in a really small space, and so that's all good. But but,
Especially with kids. If you have kids that like to grab things, it's
oh,
easier
that's
for them
true.
to
Yeah,
touch a screen. But yeah, you're right.
that's a good point. Kids, I can really sympathize with that. But when I started painting and also painting full time, it was me and my wife in a 290 square foot studio, and I was painting in just a tiny little corner with full paint, medium, everything. Open the window, So it can be done in a small space. You don't need a ton of space. You don't need a ton of equipment. I was just using a little travel easel, and that's where I got my career off the ground. So um, I would encourage people to kind of not feel constrained by space because you can manage. Just try to be clean.
The whole little easel thing is really interesting as well, as far as like a transition of growing in art. You know, it's like growing up into maturity. Here in Monterey, we have, especially during the summer, there's this little convention they hold, and I remember because Trikel had come here a few years back, a brush company, and it was like a fine art convention held at one of the ritzy hotels, and I was like, "This has been here?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's been here for years." And I go, and I never put two and two together, but this convention was a shitload. I'm talking like Costco aisle rows of plein air paintings of homes and barns and the same four rocks that we have out here on the bay. And when you would drive, there's um, our area has like a long drive around the beach, and so you go over there and you see 15 to 20 painters with their little easels, and take in mind you see some that you're like, eek. There are quite a few that are very good. And I remember as a younger painter, I would think, man, what the fuck would you want to paint? Like, I paint from life. I'm great. But understanding how to capture a moment when it's consistently moving. Also, putting yourself in the position of sometimes you don't want to work in a studio. Sometimes you learn a lot more working from a still life or from a life in a setting where you completely just have nothing, no distractions, no cell phone, no nothing. You have that medium in front of you, and progressing to that, you see how much more that's valuable because when you get into the studio, like you said, if you mess up when you're out there painting on like these people are in front of the water, they can't just be like, control Z. They can't be like, well, I'll just grab another canvas or I'll go take a break and go to my kitchen. You're there and you better make it work. And I think that's a very valuable thing to have, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a level of intensity um, that while maybe it's not as sustainable,
Yeah.
um, like you can only do it for 3 hour blocks or something like that, or maybe more. But yeah, it's a level of intensity that you need to make sure everything is just where it needs to be. Yeah, totally.
It is a discipline though, like you were saying, is because intensity. When David Casson was talking about how he only paints with studio light. They have
Yeah.
regulated ones now that you can, put down to the Kelvin and the bicolor LEDs. But you would paint. You hear a lot of artists, and I think that's something that people don't talk about a lot. Is having that window of 3 hours is not because the cops are going to come or because your arm gets tired. It's because the lighting changes dramatically, the colors change dramatically, everything. So for anyone that hasn't done plein air painting, anyone that hasn't done from still life, that's not in a controlled studio or situation, you only have X amount of time to work. And having that trained idea of like, okay, I have to make this work right now, and almost like you're grafting a plan, to where if you're gonna go back the next day, it's got to work within those parameters or not work at all. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yep. You gotta. Oh, by the way, David Casson is awesome. That episode you did with him was really cool.
oh, thanks, man. Yeah,
Really
he's
good.
I the best thing I loved about that episode is where he asked off air. He was like, "You mind if I drink a beer?" I was like, "Dude, you're fine." He's like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah, dude." Like, take in mind, it doesn't matter if it's this podcast or the other one. I go, you've heard me tell you this. I go, just have fun. That's my only rule on here. It's just, well, the other one is basically just tell me, tell me what you don't want to talk about, but
Yeah.
just have fun, And like his idea was just, I want to chill with the beer and I'm going to just talk about art. And to me, that's I think the greatest thing is when you can talk to people from a personal standpoint of art. Because when you get certain people that are like, so David, when you look at sepia, does sepia remind you of the 17th century revolt of France? And you're just like, well, it's more of 1755, loser. Suck it. But I mean, there's a lot of knowledge to have, but I think people also tend to forget that artists like to just have fun. There's a discipline for people that are too, like myself. I'm too. You couldn't tell by my exuberant attitude, but I am very sporadic. I am very much like, oh man, I can do. I'm a great multitasker. But the problem with that is that if I have no problem saying no to 50 more tasks. So eventually some things fall off to the wayside.
Oh yeah.
And painting is one of those things of where you genuinely have to, like, it helps center me. So I have to sit down, I have to focus, I have to think about these things. And when you get artists talking about their process or their ideas and what works for them, what doesn't, I think that's a tremendous thing, because there are many painters out there, which we were all there at one point trying to figure it out, and having things that were, you are inspired by somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I think the same way. Sometimes I just don't like doing this. You're like, oh my God, you know, I don't like that either. It doesn't make you feel like an idiot.
Yeah.
Let's kind of talk about the 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 idea of colors, because number one thing people bring up about your painting is your color, is your theory, is the application and the way you work with things. And I recently just picked up this book. I don't know if you know about it, but it's called the Science of Color, I believe.
Mm-mm.
Okay,
Never heard of it.
give me 1 second.
Yeah. Let's see this.
For anyone that's curious, just look up the Secret Language of Color book of the week. Excuse me, I just did a video about it last week.
Oh,
And
cool.
this book right here, I don't know if,
Ah.
yeah, and it's actually a really cool book that has gotten me interested, because your type of art is very, very specific to some of the ideas that are in here. And basically this entire book is a giant physics and chemistry book that breaks it down at a second grade level of how color is perceived. And literally, I mean, everything's cool, from like the fact that the pages gradate down from warms to cool. But it tells you, like, okay, well, in this 7th century, they used this specific color in their paintings because this is what was available through sediment, through plants, through everything. And this is why we perceive it this way. This is how it ages. If we have it here, why does this culture have that? Why do these paintings
Oh,
have
that
that?
sounds awesome.
It's an
I'm
amazing
super
book.
I'm super interested in
The,
like
s-
yeah,
the
I've been thinking
secret,
about like how we perceive color is such a weird thing.
yeah,
Um,
it's called
yeah.
The Secret Language of Color: Science, Nature, History, Culture, Beauty of Red, Orange, Yellow, Green, and Blue and Violet, something, something, something. But it's a awesome book. You can pick it up for like $20 on Amazon, or if
Oh,
you go to a
really?
local bookstore, I believe it's $40, which is not bad either. But it's an amazing book. But the whole thing behind it is, excuse me, see how fat I am, man? I'm starting to run out of breath, and I'm like, oh my God, books. But no, the idea behind it is that our minds perceive a color wheel, and think of a color wheel that's like in Photoshop, and we see derivatives of color, and we see all this massive jumble of a rainbow. But the problem is if you do not train your eyes scientifically, our mind is meant to see focal points. Hence why depth. Hence why bokeh in photography or videography works. So we're noticed as seeing 1,000 little things, and now with our minds being around digital color, illuminated color, dulled color, all these different things over the years, our mind is trained to see more than that's actually there. So the science literally tells you there are 9 colors, there are 7 doors, there are this, there are that. They give you a bunch of the different ways to think of it, and they say the problem is we're seeing all these different ideas of what color and what is actually there. But in reality, if you ever want to figure out how to look and know if your color theory is on point, go to a digital tool, and look at a color. So right now I'm looking at a Donatello Ninja Turtle that I have right here,
So
and
cool.
and I would go and I would pick this color. I'm pointing to his arm, and I would say, okay, I see the computer screen illuminating color. I see a tungsten light, which is the yellow lights most of us have at home, that is doing the cast shadowing, and then I'm seeing the green in between. It says pick those 3 colors, and then go to a color wheel and go and pick each 3 and make a mark on your canvas, digitally or physically. From there, take a photo of what you're looking at the same color that your eyes perceive, or ISO or aperture that you're looking at, luminance, so to speak. And from there, go and color pick those tools. And you will notice that there is always, 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 unless you are a master at color, a 5 degree in shift, meaning that you're either too warm, too cool, or you're not neutral enough with gray. And the reason we perceive that is because the way we understand color and how it works with other colors. Now, in physical mediums, understanding how specific sediments or minerals in color working. If you buy a tungsten type of red or yellow, I'm sorry, and you mix it with a ultramarine blue, but these two companies pull their sediments from these areas of the world, one's going to have a natural dissipation of true color, so it stays blue through the entire time or stays yellow through the entire time, versus another company taking it from these two, which has a really strong saturation point but a very short fall off, so it becomes watery. This whole book kind of explains to you why things in art, specifically through the 1300s, that we could pull some older art like Barry's, why it's lasted so long, but house paint doesn't last longer than 10 years, and why that matters artistically, why it matters cinematically. And I think it's a great thing because talking about this book also goes into the idea of how I've reinvented looking at your paintings. You know, I do these book of the weeks on my Instagram or on my YouTube channel, and I do it because I'm a book nerd. Every week I got to buy 3 or 4 books, and I got to read
Yeah, I
them. I
can
got to
see
check them
that
out, and and
in the
I
back.
like sharing with people because I think there's cool things. And this book is one of those prime examples of something that when I started looking at your paintings, I'm like, wow, that's a nice orange, and it goes beautiful with blue because it's a complement of color. You read this and you're like, oh my god, that makes so much sense. Why that transition works? Why if you did an analog color, a dark blue to a light blue works with a dark orange to a bright yellow. And it's weird, but it actually makes you a better artist because you're more aware of the smart brushstrokes and less control Z. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
So after saying all that, what started you being interested? What started you on the path of being interested in the colors you chose, and what helped you develop into the colors that you now are very well known for, the luminance of colors, I should say?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so before I started painting, I didn't really think color mattered that much. I mean, I liked certain colors and but I didn't think in that I think I didn't think it was that important because I didn't know how to use it. Um, and then when I started to paint, you have to use color. Like there's no way around it. Like that is color. So I I I got excited about it like immediately. I'd been so used to working black and white with architecture that using color was a lot of fun, and I just kind of went crazy at first. Like everything was bright colors, like just intense, like
Mm,
as intense as I could. And then over time, realizing that it's not just intensity that matters, but restraint too. Like uh, it's perception of intensity that matters. So if a whole painting is all bright colors all next to each other, no one thing is going to look particularly intense. But if just one area is very high saturation and it's relative to all the surroundings that are more gentle, um, then that area will look even more colorful than a painting that is all colorful, you know?
mm-hmm,
So restraining the area of intense color, and then beyond that, um, beyond just level of saturation, opposite temperature. So that, yeah, that you know how when you're looking at a certain color,
mm-hmm,
like a sheet of paper that's all green, and
right.
then you look away, and in that spot in your eye, there's like it'll be like a red
Yep.
block. Yeah, you get used to the color, and then you look away. Well, that you can kind of get that effect with in a painting, um, um, kind of with the opposite colors, is that just relative to each other. Um, like having an orange on a yellow background is gonna okay, it's orange, but having an orange on a blue background, that orange is gonna seem that much more vibrant.
Yes.
So yeah, so I've just been trying to push that as much as possible, and then trying it with like you can do it with any color, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
just go the opposite side of the wheel or whatever, and then see what you can do. So that's how I always think about that.
That's interesting because that's like a great exercise because you look at the idea of complement of color and analog color. And they always say, you know, the best way to understand the exercise David's talking about is take a circle of blue, you know, whatever that blue is. And if you're doing it physically, try not to obviously contaminate the colors, but put a circle of blue and then put a square or a rectangle big enough to pull away from the white around the canvas or wherever you have it or the piece of paper, and examine how that blue reacts to yellow, reacts to orange, reacts to purple. And each different one works in a different way. The Secret of Design is another book, which is it's specifically meant for people that make logos and do web design and so forth. But it's very interesting because they have that there. I'm drawing a blank, which is revoking my nerd card, but um, the exercise was to take in Photoshop or any kind of tool, take a red circle and place it near five colors that are opposite of that color, complementive, analog, or whatever, and then derivatives. So you have 25 colors, and look at how different that red stands out, how much it looks in harmony, how much it looks out of harmony, and then from there you're better associating why does Netflix look so much more comfortable as a red background with a white letter than a red letter with a white background. Why does that matter? Because our eyes naturally see the red, and you think, oh man, that's a little bit easier in the eyes than just a giant white screen blaring, and you get this tiny red to kind of dull out the luminance. So having that understanding of color helps out tremendously. And this is the idea of the screen thing comes into the argument of what Pamela Wilson was saying a while back on one of her interviews, having illuminated color from a computer screen, an iPad or whatever, versus physical reference or a photo. Now you
Right.
find a lot of artists that genuinely are like, I don't use reference, but they do. And
Of
there's
course.
and there's others that that there are well enough trained to imagine. Kim, I can't remember pronounce his name, Jungis or Jugis, the master of all sketching. The dude,
Oh, I don't know.
he's a Chinese, I believe, artist, and the dude sketches anything just freehand, amazing. But he's a prominent sketcher for a lot of illustrators because the dude knows the complete science of if you want to draw people, I can draw you 1,000 people at a concert right now and everything in detail. But I know the depth, I know the angles, the perspective, the lighting, the shadows. He's one of those guys. Now, if you're at that level, then okay, you can scoff at us. But for sake of reference, Pamela's argument is that every time you look at something illuminated, I have a lamp right here off to the side of the monitor, and it's like a bamboo cover. With that, the light from the inside is a lot more it has a lot more strength of color because it's an actual illuminated source. And she goes, you're never gonna be able to achieve that if it comes from a screen versus still life. You're kind of that proprietor or that special even medium where you have a live model or you have a live setting, but you know how to bring that luminance through like it is legitimately has like a light bulb in there. I'm not fully convinced you don't stick light bulbs behind your actual paintings, but
Just in the
yeah.
oranges, stuff them full of light bulbs.
But with that being said, how do you work in between those two ideals of somebody working from physical reference
Oh yeah.
to digital or illuminated?
Yeah. Well, with still life, always just from life because it's so convenient. It would be silly to take a picture of it because the picture loses so much. And yeah, I agree. Well, um, what Pamela was saying, seeing it on a screen is an extra remove from it's going to translate it in a different way, and that will make it more difficult. So if you can avoid it, then that's great. So yeah, with still life, I always from life, just real reference right in front of me, which is the best way. But with figure and cityscape, I always use digital reference. I take my own photos and then um, have them on the screen. So I do think that I do um, agree with Pamela in a way like that. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough translating what you see on the screen, because yeah, emitted light is going to be a lot different than light that's shining on your painting. It's just going to be different. But so in a way, um, painting from reference is more difficult, because you need to translate it again. It already translated from real life, and then you have to translate it again from digital back into something that is like real life, or that has life. So um, that actually took a long time for me. Well, we painted from life at Schuler School, like life models, and then having to, just for practical reasons and budget, all that, having to start painting from reference for figure stuff, and portrait, was very difficult. I I it took me a long time to be able to do that, um, because you feel constrained by the photo because it's dead, it's perfectly still and pre-flattened for you, so that you start to feel like you need to, somehow match it, or um, yeah, it's not a good it's not a good way to go about it. So you have, over time I was able to kind of shift my mental state when painting from photo reference, and treat it as if kind of it was like life. So I so what I'm going for is, an impression of that reference. I'm not constrained by the image, by the detail of the image, any of that. I'm going to treat it like I'm painting from life. I'm going to go direct, and and try to make a good painting from it. I mean, you don't have the luxury when you're painting from life. You don't have the luxury of just having tiny brushes and kind of sneaking around and trying to make it super tight, and taking your time and being sloppy or unintentional. You have to be efficient, and get get the essence. Yeah, you get the essence of it, and that's what makes it feel alive. So if you can train your brain to have that mentality while using digital reference, then it can be good, I think.
Nice. Mr. Cam Rackham is here,
Ah, cool. What's up?
and, and he says, "Hello, David. Great
Hello.
podcast. How big is your antique glassware collection? How do you conceptually translate a piece of glass or any of your references to canvas?" Cam is also another person that translates luminance extremely well
Oh yeah.
through a painting. So, with that being said, like well, let's start off with the first one. How big is your antique glassware collection or collection in general? Because you have a lot of different stuff. I even sent you some photos from the antique shop over here of some
Yeah, that's
pieces.
awesome. Good stuff. I would have thought I would have been, yeah, so interested in objects. But yeah, to call them antique would be, is a little bit fancy. They're just used glass things, and just crappy stuff from Goodwill. Any thrift stores have tons of cool stuff, and it's, yeah, it's about two two shelves, like two like bookshelf size things, floor to ceiling, of just junk. Yep, nothing fancy.
You don't have any of your wife's friends come over and like, "Oh my god, I love your china set." She goes, "That's my husband's." And the second one was, how do you conceptually translate a piece of glass or any of your references to canvas?
Mm, conceptually. Um,
I think in general, like if you've always seen those candy bowls, like the old 1920s types, and they have the thousand of little rivets and stuff like that on them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be a nightmare to
Oh yeah.
do. Um,
Yeah, what I look for when I'm looking at objects is just usually some big and bold effect, like this has awesome reflections, or it has a really cool highlight, um, or I like the shape profile. So the uh, the uh, the objects themselves, I usually choose fairly simple shapes, um, and and then just bring out, uh, make it dramatic, big and bold and dramatic, and just squinting, getting the essence of that drama without getting bogged down in the detail. Um, so glass, for example, just squinting at it, you'll see that it's just, like clear glass, just a highlight, a couple other highlights, a couple reflections on the edges, a little bit of darks, in the ellipses, a little bit, and that's about it. Um, there's not you can get the impression of it without going into super detail. And so I try to make it look as good as possible, but with as little detail as possible, um, if that makes sense.
mhm. One painting glass or stuff that has like a high reflective rate. Do you try to? Do you try to? Because I've seen like let's use a I can't even think of a word of it, but like almost like those jars. It's not even a jar. What you put iced tea in when you're pouring it. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, like a mason
A
jar?
mason jar. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of in one of those ways. Like, and you see them, and a lot of painters usually paint some dark grays, and then they'll paint the reflective background with a little bit of a, lighter or cooler tone, and then they put a really sharp highlight on it. When you do a lot of your paintings, you genuinely have it's prominent. It's not just somebody that's like, oh, I'll put a few gray lines and there it is. Like you literally have it there. Do you try to saturate the whole thing as far as paint wise and try to actually paint the entire glass figure, so to speak, and then you build around it, like you said, those small little highlights, those small little cuts, or do you try to keep it as close to the background color as possible and paint around the background color? If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I guess kind of maybe the second option because if clear glass, for example, it is the
Clear.
background is a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, so, so for me, I'm painting the background and the glass at the same time. It is one thing, and you need background around it already to know what it is inside because so much of that background is coming through. Um, so yeah, all at once.
Nice. Richard asks again. He also says that tell him I am a big fan and follow him on Instagram and
Oh,
inspires me a
thanks.
lot.
Thanks.
Sweet.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Uh, what kind of oils do you recommend? What other mediums like Galkid are you using, if at all?
Mm. Well, for mediums, I use sometimes I do use Galkid, or Galkid Slow Dry. Those are great, but I like gel medium that just stays on the palette in a little pile. And so I use Neo Megilp by Gamblin. Um, but Gamblin has all sorts of great mediums. They are my favorite mediums. For paint, I mostly use Winsor Newton. Just Winsor Newton artist oils are a really good balance of um, quality and price. I think they're really high quality
Mm-hmm.
actually, and really consistent too, which is nice. But also affordable, so you can use a lot of paint, which is good. It'll make your paintings better to have a lot of paint. So um, I think they're great. I'm used to the colors because all the different brands have kind of different, a little bit different colors. In the light, in the bright light colors like the yellows and oranges, and then red also, they have a really good opacity and saturation. So that's good stuff. And then sometimes I use their Alkyd line, which is called Griffin. If I want to, sorry,
It's okay.
damn it.
It's cool, man. You're completely fine. That's actually Windsor Newton calling him right now, just to letting them know that they are very grateful and have a pallet out my Monday.
Oh man. Yeah. So yeah, the alkyd line is called Griffin, and that's just fun because it's fast drying for when I need to get painting done quickly, when I need to dry quickly and it needs to be framed. Um, and but so I use different brands of paint also, like some Gamblin, Richardson. Yeah.
Can you give a little bit more on the importance, like using Windsor Newton? I'm a Windsor Newton person as well, and I agree with the opacity and punch that a lot of them have. But another good point that comes back from that secret language of color book is a discussion that I've had with like during live chats when I'm painting or just doodling around why people should buy an artist series or a professional series grade of paint versus a store bought brand, because a lot of people tend to think that, oh man, I'm going to get this little, I'm going to get this 20-ounce thing of paint that says artist on it, and I'm going to get that for $8 versus the little, let's just say 2 to 4 ounce that's worth probably $21, but there's a huge difference in the amount of, you know, um, the acrylic polymers that are in there and so forth. But
Mhm. Yeah.
basically, the importance of why you should, if you want this look, if you want the feel of what a lot of painters are doing, why you want to invest in a better paint.
Yeah. So there's kind of a threshold um, of what good paint is, I think, and so you just don't buy student grade because it's not worth it to you. Yes, you may save a couple bucks, but it's going to make your learning, it's going to hinder your learning. You're not going to be able to learn to use paint because it's slippery and slimy. It has too much binder in it. It doesn't have the opacity that you need in the lights. You can't stack it as well. So for direct painting, it needs to be structured enough so that you can stack paint on top of paint. So just don't buy student grade paint. But anything beyond student grade paint is pretty good. Like uh, even like what's I don't know, is Utrecht still around?
Yeah,
They had like that their store brand of artist grade, not student grade, but artist grade paint was pretty good.
yeah,
So like anything that's artist grade, not student grade, is good, is the way to go. And yeah, the cadmiums are going to be expensive, but um,
they're worth it.
yeah,
They're definitely worth
it's
it.
good, good stuff.
We've talked about this before as far as anyone that knows the Gustavo Ramada. Arte de Gustavo is a very well known acrylic painter, and he uses the medium grade liquid body acrylics from what is it, Liquitex, or I always
Mm.
forget that brand.
Or golden or
Golden, thank you. I'm sorry, stupid Liquitex. But they're not the most expensive paints out there. He knows how to use them, and he knows how to paint vibrantly, just like Crayola. Greg Simpkins is another painter that knows how to bring a lot of vibrance, and their paints aren't that expensive or aren't that fancy. I'm putting my pinky out here, but the idea is that it's not because it's a cheaper in price or cheaper in quality. Sometimes you do know what to do with what you have, but every artist that at some point or time in another will always have the differentiation between learning what's going to go on easier and working smarter, or working harder to bring that luminance. So the number one thing I always recommend to people is go to a local go to a local art store if you have one and support them. That's more important. But buy a Reeves watercolor tube. It's the cheapest way to do something without throwing away a lot of money. And buy a designer's gouache or designer's watercolor, because they're roughly about $2 for one of them and then $8 for the other. And little tubes, and just pour out a tiny bit. Take a brush, preferably a flat or a filbert, something that can spread a little easier.
yeah.
Take a little water and then pull from the dead end inside the pigment and pull it down and look at how that color dissipates and look at how the pigment is rich and how it just falls flat. And
Yeah.
that is a perfect example of why, even though most of these painters don't, some painters use professional grade, other ones use medium grade. There's still an amount of luminance or pigment inside them that you can pull from that source versus the artist grade, which David's talking about. That you, the second it leaves that pile, you're done. It's basically filler. So definitely experiment with that because he makes a good point. You don't have to have all the money in the world, but sometimes certain colors, specifically cadmium, because it is a very expensive color to make, that you can also learn about. You are going to pay for it, but you are going to fight it a lot less on your painting. And nothing is worse than actually getting the proportions down that you want. You put the first stroke on, you're like, son of a bitch, it's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's start talking about other kind of things that inspire us, like books.
Yeah.
Hey, David, do you like books?
Hey, I do.
Oh, there's this book by an artist named David Cheifetz that I see that has come out. Have you heard of this book?
I have. I just heard of it. It's called Figure. It's his first book.
Must go, must grab, much wow.
Awesome.
Congratulations, dude. That is so awesome. I was checking it out online and I gotta grab mine. That is it's phenomenal. This is your first
Thank you.
book.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I I wanted to do a book, but the issue was if I was gonna do it, I wanted to make it look good. Like I I don't know. I've seen other art books that are the content's awesome, but like just the print quality is kind of disappointing. Like the color is not quite. So that was where my priorities went. It's not a cheap book, but it's because I wanted to get the thickest paper I could get, and I wanted to get the best color I could get. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it, and also it was kind of fun to exercise some graphic design skills and uh, do some writing too. So um, yeah,
What goes in, and this is gonna lead into what our topic earlier, that you and I through email were talking about. But what goes into making a book? Now there are the amazing people like Steven and Jinxie over at Out of Step Books. I almost had it, but no. Out of Step Books. Steve and Jinxie are two beautiful people as well as amazing punk rock parents. But they own Out of Step Books, where they do collections of different artists, and seeing them work on books and the amount of time and layout and making sure everything's correct and proofreading and proofreading and proofreading and then going back to check the photos and then being like, oh crap, I didn't proofread. And seeing that seems to be, like you say, it's like you said, it's awesome to actually have to design something. It must be daunting, but do you feel that when you're going kind of through an archive of your paintings, like what goes through your head on top of actually making a book?
oh yeah. Well, just um, thinking about the process and remembering the process for the paintings themselves, because in several of the so for several of the paintings, I write a paragraph about either the process or the motivation behind the painting, and that's kind of cool, like mental a cool mental exercise to like break down like why how I felt about it, why I did it, how I did it. Um, so that was cool. Um, yeah, but yeah, uh, it was kind of a it's always more work than you think it's going to be. But I like just the proofreading. I went through it several times, and I was like, okay, it's good. Everything, there's no typos or anything like that. And then on the very last one, um, I caught that I had my wife write the forward because she's um, been my model so often,
Mm-hmm.
and but I wrote forward. I spelled forward wrong. Forward for a book is different than forward. Just going forward. So I was this close. this close to getting the wrong forward in there. It's just like, oh my God, the edits are endless. Just little stupid stuff like that.
It's good that that would have been pretty awesome though. The first
Yeah.
word in the entire book. What could be worse? You could have spelled your own name wrong on the front cover, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's great, man. Well, I'm happy because that you came out with it, and congratulations to you. I will be picking up a copy myself, if not two, because I'm a big book nerd for one, but two, it's cool as you flip through the book, and I've seen a little what it's inside, and you actually have some process in there as well, which is I think essential for many artists out there because Richard had asked earlier, do you paint for fun or do you is it strictly business? Which we'll ask that question right now. But you kind of see through the process that you don't just do the painting, because the problem I think with today is like what's his name, Cesar Ramos, is that his name? I I'm trying to remember. He's the bald guy with the big beard.
Oh, it's Santos, right?
Santos. There you go.
Yeah, his stuff is great.
He's
So,
amazing, and his DVD was phenomenal. But
oh, you got it. Nice.
yeah, I got it and I watched it, and it was cool. But just like a few other artists, and this is not a knock, but like you see some people that come up with art stuff, and it's just like it's very cut and dry. It's very to the point, and it's like I don't like to be in a classroom where a teacher is just regurgitating what they see. I like to see the ideas that are bouncing in the head, and your book kind of goes through that of where you're like, hey, like this is what I do, and then on top of that, this is what I think about, and it's personal, and I like that.
Oh, thanks. Awesome.
What are some of the things that you kind of focus on in this book for anyone that's aspiring to maybe learn more from you or about your work?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's mostly a picture book, but yeah,
All right.
I do have several of them. Where I where I show the process and then I talk about why I made a decision or the struggle that I found in that painting and what I changed in it. And then a couple of them are just kind of um, uh, um, more about what the painting means to me or what it meant, why I painted it. Yeah, yeah, just like a little paragraph here and there for a few of the paintings. Yeah.
Now, on top of book stuff, you also do a tremendous amount of workshops and galleries. You were very interested in kind of elaborating more on that because a lot of artists, especially from the last episode we had, kind of covering the whole thing of where everybody is so concerned with creating art at a point or another that eventually they get to the point where they want to just push it out there, and sometimes it's not always the best avenues they're getting welcome to, or they don't know how to go about it. You were particularly interested in talking about galleries, specifically in submitting or just things that go along with that, and I'd like to touch on that with you because some emails that I did get were very happy. Even some pretty well up there artists like yourself that were like, "Oh man, I'm glad to hear about this kind of stuff because it is very much a thing that nobody wants to talk about, but it's
Yeah.
something that needs to be talked about because,
Yeah.
well, as artists ourselves, we need to know that we're all thinking the same thing, and vice versa to aspiring artists, not to be caught up in some of the stuff that happens or not, or be a little bit more conscious of some of the things that you like. You don't want to come into a gallery. Like I saw this one artist a few weeks back. I was visiting the Dr. Seuss museum that we have over here. It's a very tiny little place. And the guy goes, is this just Dr. Seuss? And the woman was like, yes, it is. And, I'm peripherally listening to this. And he goes, well, I do artwork that's pretty amazing. And I've been featured in many galleries. So I want to know how your gallery works. And I was like, if you knew how galleries work, you wouldn't be doing this, asshole. But he's like, how do I get in here? And like the lady's look on her face, and she had the best response too. She looked at him and like very, very cordially and very calmly. I mean, she has to be 80. She goes, well, you have to be Dr. Seuss, hun.
That's awesome. That's perfect. Perfect
So
response.
maybe some also proper etiquette for future people that want to get into these gallery settings. Um,
Yeah.
what's your experience with galleries or has been?
Yeah. Yeah, people ask me a lot about it, and yeah. So my experience, Generally positive, really. I think it's I think it's really important as an artist to have both. You need to have both kind of nerd like foster your own following and do your own marketing and get your own collectors, but also work with galleries because they can reach people that you would never reach, and they've already created relationships, personal relationships with people that are really excited about art and passionate about it, but want to see it in person first before purchasing it. So I guess throughout my career, it's been about half and half. If you broke it down, probably it would come out to be about half and half direct or galleries, but more and more galleries lately. Yeah. Um, any specific things? There's lots to touch on.
Well, let's start off with what's something that you feel that needs to be talked about, because the thing that a lot of people need to understand, and I safely say this um, from a guard tower spot of the fact that I don't really go in galleries, so it doesn't concern me. Not to say that I have any disposition towards it, but there are a lot of politics in art and tattooing and anything, every single thing. Let's make that very clear to all people that are in any industry. There are politics that lie in everything.
Mhm.
Now, your personal views on top of political views sometimes do not mix because and political meaning by like what's going on in that industry, not president stuff. But the idea of like it doesn't always mix, but it's because it's a professional thing. Like, you know, you're being an adult, letting whatever go. But there are certain things like we were talking last week about Zombie Nose. That's who I was trying to remember the name of. Was devastated when they had 30 people from around the world, beautiful sculptors of horror movie stuff. If you've seen like the crazy pumpkin sculptors around the world, like all these amazing people that do these beautiful carvings, sent to a gallery, and this person disappeared, and it's been 2 years now, you know, and nobody
Oh,
knows who this person is, and it's all gone. And when you work on something feverishly and passionately that goes towards your family, goes towards your craft, goes towards more supplies, you know, that that really, it's like the salt on top of the wound of someone taking something from you, you know.
right.
And people don't understand that, oh well, you can just paint another. That's not the
Yeah.
premise, you know, that's not the point.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important and more so lately in the past couple of years. And even more recent, I've realized it's just really important to, if you want to be with galleries, to not think of it as an adversarial type of relationship, or even one that you need to have your guard up, um, because they're they're one of us. They,
Yeah.
they're on our side, and in fact, um, in order to run a gallery, the amount of appreciation and passion for art that you need, like appreciating just looking at art, they have more than I have. Like my passion is making art, but they actually love art,
Mm-hmm.
like they love to look at it and they love to deal with it, and they're really more similar to us, and they work really hard. Like it's yeah, and I really have only recently realized how difficult it is to run a gallery and how much work it is. Um, so they definitely earn their money, and it might be harder than being an artist, maybe.
Well, yeah, because like the equivalent in my head is somebody who is passionate about movies versus somebody who makes the movies. And people who are in the movie making business, of course, they love movies, but they're willing to sacrifice the magic of Hollywood, so to speak. You know, VFX, SFX, all these other people that create what we see on screen. They're willing to do the job and kind of lose the mysticism behind it. But there are people who will never make a movie in life, but are so enthusiastic about the industry itself that they will do whatever they can to keep that industry going in the purest art form or in the relative art forms that it has. And like you said, sometimes those people are 1,000 times more passionate to be in a gallery and sit down in a place that you got to pay rent for and hopefully sell some of this artwork and make sure you keep the artist happy, make sure you keep the quality up there and be able to keep the lights on. Like it's a hard thing for some people. What was one of the first galleries you've ever gotten into professionally?
The first few I was in were local to Baltimore, where I was learning to paint. And yeah, one of them, small Carmen's, we had a really good thing going. They're awesome. And then I had a couple early on in my career. I had a couple negative experiences with because there's a huge range, just like normal people. There's a huge range of gallery owners, and a lack, maybe in some, a lack of professionalism. And yeah, I did a. So I would advise if you're going to enter, if you're going to start getting to galleries, try to do maybe a local one first, so that you can see them in person, talk to them in person, and if you're in it, make surprise visits, because that's what I did to one of the galleries that I was in for a short time. And when I got there, my paintings were stacked up on the floor, like not not cool. Like, you don't paint stuff for it to be stacked on the floor.
Right.
So I pulled out of that little one, and it was a drama, and they were unhappy. But like, you know,
Oh, you mean that they put your paintings that you worked on the floor and framed and took the time to do, and you took it back because it was on the floor, and they were displeased because they treated your artwork wrong. God, you're an asshole.
I know, I'm so rude. Um, yeah, yeah. So you got to just be careful. So, but the key thing, right now, and everything right now is great. Um, the key thing is, and what I learned recently, because um, I had a difficulty, but I realized it was my fault. I was well, it's both sides own a lack of communication or whatever, but it was a little thing can turn into a big thing if there's not communication.
Right.
So if you're working with a gallery, it is best to have constant communication, like, and preferably over the phone,
Yeah.
because email is a weird thing. So yeah, just make sure to communicate if you have any grievances or whatever, and go back and forth, because you're ultimately on the same side. And don't try not to lose sight of what the goal is, which is to have a good relationship and to sell your work, which they want to sell your work too. So um, yeah, just try to communicate as much as possible. Like, for example, you might assume that if a gallery needs more work, they'll ask you,
Hmm.
but they might assume that if you wanted to give them more work, you'd just give it to them. That's just one
Yeah.
example of, like, where just a tiny lack of communication could just kind of mess up your whole relationship. So just yeah, just keep communicating, and then it's actually not that it always turns out much better that way. So
Oh
that was a
yeah.
lesson that I learned about, just, yeah,
And
just
what's some things that you try to keep in mind with galleries now, or that you experience as someone who's been in a gallery for, or been in a few galleries, even after a solo show, like something that's always a good thing to keep in mind on a checklist or something.
um Sorry, I spaced out for a second. Can you
It's
repeat
cool, dude.
that?
Are those your kids in the back?
Oh, you can hear them?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
they're
No, I'm just making
upstairs.
sure that there's no kids in here because we don't have kids. So I'm like, oh. No. What's like a checklist that you try to keep in mind with when dealing with the gallery now? I mean, besides the communication thing, which is true because especially in today's day and age, and people always like you have to email me. It's the easiest way to be professional, and it's like sometimes like yeah, if you're doing commission work or so forth, like it's not a problem, but you're not always going to know how that person actually is personally,
Yeah,
or phonetically. You know, the way when they say something, you don't know if they're like if you were to talk to me through email, what you do, you know how I act, you know how I talk. So it's just like 90% of our talk is like, man, this was cool about art. By the way, are you gonna go see the new Guardians of the Galaxy movie? Oh my god, you know, versus being like, hey, you know what, I have these concerns.
yeah.
So, what is your checklist when you deal with a gallery?
Ah, yeah. Well, from an artist standpoint, I guess, for checklist for what I need to do, um, uh, don't be high maintenance. I've uh, I've done that. Um, they're so busy. You have no idea how busy they are. Um, it's easy to forget that there's like they're managing other artists and stuff. So don't be high maintenance. Um, just short, precise communications, and not while they're setting up a show or something. Um, and uh, get things done early. Be professional. If you say you're going to do something, just do it and make sure you do it early and ship early and package your paintings well and frame them well. Yeah, just be professional. It's like a real job. It is a real job. So, yeah, just like as an artist, people may expect you to be flaky, but that doesn't mean you have the right to be flaky. Like you
Right.
actually have to run it like a business. So I would say that that's super important to keep in mind. Um, yeah.
There's a story of an artist. I'm not going to name names, but this guy gave me a original a while back, and he did characters for World of Warcraft. And you know, we were talking about stuff and so forth, and lo and behold, he was dealing with galleries for the first time, and was like, I can't believe I'm getting in them, and all this other stuff, and I'm just so excited. I'm like, dude, that's great. He's like, any advice? I go, you know, be kind, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I've never been in a gallery, but I said, you know, the best thing you can do with dealing with galleries is be open, honest, and punctual. I mean, I treat it the same way I would want to be treated if I was running an art show. And later on in time, he goes, "Hey man, can I get that piece of artwork back? I want to put it in the show." I said, "Sure, dude. Of course. Like I have no problem." You know, I've gotten quite a few paintings and sketches from artists because of podcasts that are just like, "Hey man, thanks for having me on. Here's something." And it's not weird for someone to be like, "Hey, I would like to put that in a show. Could I get it back?" And I'm like, "Yeah, dude. You know, no hair
Yeah.
off my back." Come to find out, the gallery had told me that apparently this person had submitted quite a few paintings and knew that I knew this person, and said like, yeah, we never got anything and so forth, so on. Come to find out that the person had sold them to some other collector whom I knew, and was like, hey, wasn't this your drawing at your house when I went to go stay at your place? I was like, yeah. Yeah. I was like, how much did you buy it for? And he was like, I bought it for 600. And I was like, well, it's at your house now. He's like, you don't want it back? I was like, not for 600 bucks. You know, I didn't like it that much.
Oh man.
But the idea being of like having the ability to think that, you know, if you act like a diva or you act like this same artist over time has the attitude of, I paint like Salvador Dali, so you should respect me. And I'm not even exaggerating this person. And somebody else goes, well then what is your style? Well, I'm myself. And they go, no, you're like Salvador Dali, so why don't you do something else? You know, kind of like poking and prodding at him. And looking at this person and how they deal with local galleries, and just like, wow, people, nobody wants to deal with this person.
Yeah.
The moral of that story is, if you're an artist, you have to really realize how small this gallery world is, how much smaller the artist community is, and that people do talk, where the political thing comes in. That's that sounds like such a negative word, but in reality, it's because a lot of artists that do have a very stable, conscious mind about how they like to treat people and vice versa, be treated, they don't want to get screwed over. They don't want to deal with people that are going to cause drama,
Yeah.
And so, definitely, like you said, when you're dealing with the gallery, if the gallery is being tough, but other artists kind of tell you, don't worry, they deliver, or don't worry, give them a chance. Take it, don't worry about it. Don't hit them up 40 times and be like, by the way, is my painting in the wall and on the bill? No. Oh, I, with just all these random sounds. Sir, are you okay?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true, man. Well, yeah, it's such a small world, so everyone should just be cool, and then it'll be good.
I have, I have,
Yeah,
I have,
artist talk for sure.
I have to ask this because I genuinely want to know if you'll say something, but you don't need to be specific. Nothing. Have
Yeah,
you ever heard of a horror story like what happened to Zombie Nose?
I've heard of horror story. Yeah, I've heard of horror stories, um, quite a few times, but the most recent one I can talk about because it was public on Instagram. Um, if you, Jeremy Mann, if you follow him, he's an
Mm-hmm.
amazing painter. He apparently got really screwed over by a gallery in Italy. Um, that sounded terrible. So yeah, they like took 9 of his paintings and didn't give him his money. So
Oh wow.
that's just one, yeah, public example. And they for I don't know any details or anything, but they sure paid for it online. Oh
Well,
my God.
that's the crazy thing with social media nowadays. Getting news to other people is really easy, and it shouldn't deter people away from going to galleries or going to people. That should encourage you, because the community of artists genuinely have the whole. Once again, and like the political thing can be also perceived as a union. People do look out for each other and are like, "Hey, man, I love your work." I mean, Cam Rackham is a phenomenal painter. Last time it was you, Cam, and Andy. No, it was what was his face? Derek
Oh,
Harrison
yeah.
in the
Yeah.
chat, and you guys are all complimenting each other the entire time while I'm making fun of Kate. And you're I was looking at you guys actually talking in the live chat versus having the conversation with Kate about an artist's perception of galleries and what goes into it, and then actually having to run a gallery, and the compliments you guys were giving each other. Like, oh, I love your work, and it was very polite, very cordial, but at the same time, you guys were joking around and goofing off. And the great thing about that is that, have you ever met Cam or Derek?
Nope.
Yeah, and vice versa. But the camaraderie between you guys amongst peers is very, very encouraging. So, anyone listening, do not be deterred from all these different places or horror stories, because there are many artists out there that are like, dude, I love that person's work. His or her work really genuinely inspires me. I would hate for something to see it happen. So there's always someone out there looking out for you, whether you realize it or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why I like podcasts such as yours,
Well,
because you realize, oh, you realize there's such a strong community, and it's really inspiring. It's especially if you're all alone in your studio all the time. It's just cool. It's just cool to hear.
yeah, I appreciate that as well, man, because it's interesting, doing both podcasts and having the dynamics of talking to people about subjects versus talking about technique, which some guy got mad at me for the other podcast. He goes, "You haven't talked too in depth with technique for a while." And I thought about it. And I was like, you know what? I don't, because we just start enjoying each other's conversation.
Yeah.
And I was like, whatever, you know. I listen to comedy podcasts when I'm painting or movie podcasts, but um, I think that's the thing that I try to encourage with other people, which is why you inspire me, why other people inspire, is that if you don't have a source of inspiration, a source of knowledge, you know, whether it be the oil painting, whether it be galleries, whether it be just talking to the artist, there is a great opportunity to delve into many artists you would never see in the world. You know, the story of Blake Newber saying that, you know, he grew up in this tiny little town in the Midwest, and you have one Barnes and Noble. If an artist was not published in that town, in that bookstore,
Mhm.
you would not know about those artists.
Yeah.
You know, so having the open, you know, media now to where you can discover people all over the world and doing all these things, if you can't get what you can get from, you know, well, my podcast can't say this one, but oh, well, please don't go, please. They'll fire, they'll hurt me. But you know, always do start your own. Do something that makes you happy. That's why artists create, is because sometimes we want to see things more of what we like, but we can't find them, so we do them ourselves. And I think that's what really pushes a lot of artists to get to that position of where they want to create more and want to do more. Seeing your stuff in a gallery would be phenomenal, because now I look at your technique. And you know, one thing I forgot to ask last time we had spoke was, if you're going to do a luminance of a halo around the person behind them, but it's like a spreading light, you know what I mean? A focal point of light, so to speak. You know, and you're using your palette knife, do you directly go and make almost like a sunflower around the head and then gradate the colors out to a white to blue? You know, you go through every little single one, or do you just kind of make impressions and kind of mix as you go? You know, I would never know that unless I got to actually talk to you.
Yeah.
And, you know, vice versa. Of course, I could experiment, but it's a lot easier, especially if you couldn't afford how, you know, that one tube of paint is your main source of paint for the next month, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, man. So, for any gallery shows that are going to be coming up, any paintings or so forth that you're going to be doing, do you want to pimp those out?
Oh yeah. Next month is the uh, Trekell curated show at Raison. You call it Raisin.
Raisin
Um,
Gallery, the California Raisins.
Raison Gallery in Southampton, New York. Yeah, Jason and Kate are awesome. So
Hmm.
um, it's been awesome dealing with them. And yeah, let's see. That's about it, I think, that I can think of.
Well, before anything else, you were doing live instruction, as well as your seminars, um, but you're taking a small break from them just for the moment. Um, what is some of the things that you offer when you do the seminars or the traveling, and as well as the live instruction when you eventually get back on the schedule, in case anyone's interested? Because a chance to learn from this guy is an amazing chance, and if you don't take it, you're an asshole.
Thanks.
That's my
Yeah,
statement, not World of Pencils.
I like it. Um, yeah, I'm cutting back a little bit just because we're gonna be moving soon. But yeah, normally I do quite a bit of workshops, but I've been doing more of the online, and I'll probably, when I get started back up, it'll probably be more online stuff just for practical reasons. But yeah, I with the online mentoring, I have a big form of questions, um, which helps me design the program for each person individually because everyone's at a different level and have different goals in their painting. So yeah, it's very individualized and good good time.
Nice. As far as any of the live seminars that you do, for anyone that's curious about going to one, what's something that they should consider when signing up or when attending?
Yeah, when I do workshops, it's very they're usually anywhere from 2 to 4 days, um, or three. But yeah, I've been doing mostly still life ones, but starting to do I just this past year started to do cityscape ones also, and I really focus on composition a lot in my teaching, because that's my favorite thing to talk about, and I feel like you can't really separate it from painting. And but I take all levels really, because I remember exactly what it was like to be a beginner and not know how to hold a paintbrush, and so I feel like I've a lot to offer beginners, but also very advanced painters as well. So I always take full range of skill levels, um, and yeah, I love doing workshops.
And where can everyone find your book?
From my website, there's the store section of my website, which has all the video tutorials and the book.
Nice. Is it a limited edition, or are you doing like a continuous run?
Continuous. It's print on demand, so as soon as the order comes in, it gets printed and shipped. And yeah, just unlimited.
Awesome, awesome. Vincent Van Gogh. Um, what is a song from Instagram vid? Did you put an Instagram video up
What is the song?
from Instagram vid?
Bid? Which one? I don't know.
Sorry, buddy. Do not know.
Need specifics.
Lend me your ear. Um, sorry, Vince Van Gogh joke. But
Okay. Good one.
bazing. With that being said, where can everyone find you, David? Just in case.
David Cheifetz on Instagram, and yeah, I mostly just use it, or just my website is always good. But Instagram, Facebook is what I don't know. It just gets my feed from Instagram, you know. So
Yeah,
Instagram's the place to be.
pretty much. Well, we thank you for having you here, man. Thank you for making the time to talk a little bit more. And if you guys get a chance, pick up this dude's book. Pick up the Secret Language of Color as well that we spoke about earlier, because it's gonna go hand in hand with his type of painting, with the way he does beautiful studies, luminance, everything. And make sure that when he opens the books back up for scheduling, for a live seminar, for a live workshop, for even just the live one-on-one lessons, a one-on-one lesson with someone that paints with you and understands where you need to be to help you get better. I mean, that's the most thing. I mean, that's the most incredible thing you can possibly have, because that's catered to you. It's not cookie cutter. So I need to tell everybody here to go and check out David Cheifetz, Cheifetz.
You did it.
Yes, I did. And to definitely show the man some love, as well as just see the beautiful work that comes out of this dude's repertoire. So, as always, you can always find more about the podcast at iTunes, World of Pencils podcast. Soon we'll be coming to SoundCloud for you Android and Windows users. As well as you can always find more information on David from World of Pencils on Instagram, and make sure to subscribe, like, all that stuff. I don't know. I'm not your father. Do whatever you want. On YouTube, where you can see more of the live chats, live questionnaires for all of our artists. And thank you again, David.
Oh, thank you so much. It was fun. It's always fun to talk with you.
I know, dude. Same with you. And to everyone else out there, have a good week.